so I'd like to honor all of you by starting on time, and thank you very much for coming tonight to the Canastota Public Library. My name is Liz Metzger, I'm the library director, and if you are... So without any further ado, I'd like to have you join me in welcoming Matthew Urtz, the Madison County historian, whose presentation tonight will be about the abolitionist movement in Madison County. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. I should probably say too that you should pay attention to our social media feeds, because we have an event in June that we're not 100% ready to announce, but if you've ever heard of our History Where You Eat program, which is a program where we go to a place, you get a tour of a restaurant or a facility that you might not have gone to before. But there will be one in Canastota in June, and there may be somebody here that's speaking at that event as well. I'm not 100% sure yet, but that's the plan.
That's okay.
So this talk came about last year. I was asked to kind of put together a talk on the abolitionist movement in a certain town, and I thought I want to do it broadly as the county because the story touches almost every aspect of the county. And the abolitionist movement is a unique one because it has its roots very, very long ago, but the Great Awakening really launched what we consider the modern abolitionist movement around 1830. And in Madison County, one of the earliest events that takes place actually starts in Utica, and that was the first New York State Anti-Slavery Society meeting, which took place in October of 1835. The meeting starts at the Bleecker Street Presbyterian Church in Utica. Over 600 men showed up to be informed. And a lot of people came, including Garrett Smith, is they wanted to learn more, they wanted to see what was happening. When this started, there was actually a lot of people that were not welcoming of this event. It was moved at least once. It was supposed to be at City Hall. They didn't want it there. It was moved. And then there was a riot that took place at the meeting. The men who broke into the meeting on the grounds that an anti-slavery society was dangerous to the professional and commercial interests because, quote, the disgrace of having an abolition convention held in the city is a deeper one than that of 20 mobs, and that it would be better to have Utica razed to its foundation or have it destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah than to have this convention meet here. Amongst those leaders that were part of it was a U.S. member of the House of Representatives, a sitting judge in Oneida County. So they were quite literally forced out of Utica, New York. In some cases violently. There were people that were attacked as part of this. They made their way to Peterborough via walking, via carriage, and most prominently via the Erie Canal. Some of you may have taken part in October of last year. We actually had an anniversary event where we walked from here to Clockville, because if you read the personal notes about that event, they all talked about how high the walk was up the Oxbow. So we walked all the way till about the hill in Clockville, and then we walked back, but we wanted to honor that event and tell the story. We brought back some ghosts to tell the story. That event ended up in Peterborough, where they completed the meeting, and it kind of launched the first New York State Anti-Slavery Society in New York, and was kind of the launching moment for Madison County to get involved. Not long after that, in 1836, Casanova Seminary principal Gregory Peck was broached by students seeking permission to start an abolition society on campus. Shortly afterwards, they were given permission to have a conference, which took place and featured speakers like Garrett Smith, the Reverend Luther Myrick, who was a minister in the Congregationalist Church. The event compared colonization, which was the idea of we should take African Americans and we should send them back to Africa, versus abolitionism, which was just to free them here. It took place over 3 nights. At the event, a resolution was put forward that, quote, all ministers of the gospel and others profess to love God, yet labor to undermine the influence of his ministers and to destroy the churches, give fearful evidence of unblushing hypocrisy. So they had their way of being very vocal about it. This also helped to launch the Madison County Anti-Slavery Society, which forms in April of 1836. Local societies start to pop up in Hamilton, Casanova, Morrisville, Oneida Castle, Madison, Lebanon. The town of Lenox forms in January of 1838. Sullivan, the Madison Female Society, forms in April of 1839. 2 years later, a second meeting is held. They pass another resolution which states, whereas civil government is an ordinance of God, and whereas in this land the nature of such government is determined by the people, and whereas it is essential to the attainment of ends of government, that all entrusted with this high charge should be men of exalted principle, stern integrity, and impartial justice. Therefore resolve that the elective franchise and important talent with which our Maker has entrusted us, and for a right of which he holds us responsible, resolved that to use this talent in such a way to elevate to office of those destitute of sound moral principle, unflinching integrity, and equal justice, is grossly to pervert it and incur the displeasure of him who gave it. Resolved, this is a long one, that if be great and cruel wrong to frame mischief by laws and decree unrighteousness decrees, it is equally wrong to elect men who perpetuate the same. Resolved that no motives of partisan interest or personal friendship or any other consideration will influence to vote for men who have not principle or independence enough to avow themselves to firm adherence of principle, impartiality, liberty when publicly interrogated on the subject, that we will vote for Luther Brandish, Lieutenant Governor, Thomas Dibley for Assembly, and for these only, and in doing so we deem it important to go to the polls at an early hour and exalt our influence to our influence of other friends to do the same. Resolved that by the above resolutions signed by all the abolitionists present and be published. So in 1838, they're attempting to change the policy with elections. And they were very vocal about it. So we have this early part, again, if you look at when the Great Awakening kind of moves us into the 1830 era, we have these things happening very quickly in Madison County. We have another seminal event that takes place in October of 1839. Harriet Powell was an enslaved woman who arrives in Syracuse with her owner. Upon learning that her desire to be free, the hotel staff arranges to have her hidden in the local community. She ends up spending 2 weeks hiding in the home of Dr. John Clark of Lebanon before being removed to Peterborough and eventually Canada. Her original escape arrangements were made by the Onondaga County Deputy Clerk William Clark. She first stayed in Marcellus, was moved to DeWitt before finally moving to Lebanon. From Lebanon to Smithfield, she met Elizabeth Cady Stanton at the home of Garrett Smith. If you are familiar, they wrote a play in 2019?
Yes.
Possessing Harriet, which was based on what the conversation could have been. Elizabeth Cady Stanton kind of thumbed around the event. There is a letter that exists from Federal Dana to Garrett Smith confirming that she escaped, and she ends up in Kingston, Ontario, and marries a man named Henry Kelly. They had 7 children, and she died in 1859. This is actually the reward for her capture.
Oh, God.
It was from the Onondaga Historical Association. It's part of their collection. They were nice enough to let us use it. We have the Hamilton Female Anti-Slavery Society, which is founded in the home of John J. Foote in December of 1843. The society exists until the end of the Civil War, worked to educate, provide donations to anti-slavery individuals, ministers, missionaries, and fugitives. They raised money in multiple ways and had a number of speakers come to the village of Hamilton to speak. The home is still there today. If you're familiar with Hamilton, it's kind of right down Broad Street past the green on the right-hand side. A unique event takes place in 1843. Lewis G. Clark was born an enslaved person in Kentucky. He escaped servitude to Canada in 1841. In September and October, he came to Madison County and spoke in every single town. Just a buffer that Lincoln didn't exist at that time, so I can't confirm or deny whether they spoke there, but he spoke in every town that existed at that point. He stayed as a guest of William P. Barrett of the town of Fenner. In 1845, he published his story, the book Narrative of the Sufferings of Lewis Clark during the captivity of more than 25 years among the Algerians of Kentucky, one of the so-called Christian states of North America, dictated by himself. So one of the interesting things is I found and read a copy of his book, just to give you an idea what was inside it. He writes about when he was 9 years old, quote, "When about 9 years old, I was sent in the evening to catch and kill a turkey. They were securely in a tree, their accustomed resting place for the night. I approached as cautiously as possible, selected the victim I was directed to catch, but just as I grasped him in my hand, my foot slipped, and he made his escape from the tree and fled beyond my reach. I returned with a heavy heart to hear my mistress with the story of my misfortune. She determined at once that I should have a whipping of the first kind, and she was bent upon adding all the aggravations possible. Master had gone to bed drunk and was now fast asleep, as drunkards ever are. At any rate, he was filling the house with the noise of his snoring and the perfume of his breath. I was ordered to go and call him, wake him up, and ask him to be kind enough to give me 50 good smart lashes. To be whipped is bad enough. To ask for it is worse. To ask a drunken man to whip you is too bad. I would sooner have gone to a nest of rattlesnakes than to go to the bed of this drunkard, but go I must. Softly I crept, and gently shaking his arm, said with a trembling voice, Master, mistress wants you to wake up. This did not go to the extent of her command, and in a great fury she called out, What, you won't ask him to whip you, will you? I then added, Mistress wants you to give me 50 lashes. A bear at the smell of a lamb was never roused quicker. Yes, yes, I will. I will give you such a whooping as you will never want again. And sure enough, so he did. He sprang from the bed, seized me by the hair, lashed me with a handful of switches, threw me my full length upon the floor, kicked and cuffed me worse than he would a dog, and then threw me, with all his strength, out of the door, more dead than alive. There I lay for a long time, scarcely able and not daring to move, till I could hear no sound of the furies within, and then crept to my couch, longing for death, to put an end to my misery. I had no friend in the world to whom I could utter one word of complaint, or to whom I could look for protection. He stated Mrs. Banton, his owner, seemed to hate and abuse me all the more because I had some of the blood of her father in my veins. Upon the death in 1897, Clark's body was laid in state at the city auditorium, the first African American to be honored that way in Kentucky. He's actually buried in Oberlin, Ohio. He returned to Kentucky in 1842 to secure the freedom of his brother Cyrus, and later Cyrus's wife and children. Cyrus actually lived in Hamilton for around 5 years before he moved to Detroit, Michigan. While here, Clark attempted to vote in a town meeting, but was informed because he was colored and did not have a net worth of $250, he could not vote. Cyrus argued that he was whiter than the judge, who told him he couldn't vote, and was eventually allowed to vote. He would receive Timbuktu lands in the Adirondacks before moving to Detroit. So if you look at the image, and what the reference is, was he was the offspring of his master's grandparents. And that was referenced a couple of times, that he was a very light colored African American. August 21st, 1850, the Free Church of Cazenovia hosts a convention to protest the impending passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. An estimated 2,000 to 3,000 people attend. Many residents, again, are against the event in their local community. The first day of the event took place at the First Congregational Church, which is over here. Today, if you're familiar with Cazenovia, it'd be where the Kathleen Cummings Theater is. The second day took place in the orchard of Grace Wilson, which is right there. There's a big stone now that has a marker that explains the event. Many Americans actually approved the Fugitive Slave Act, which led to lower numbers in free and congregational churches during the 1850s. Close to 50 slaves have attended the event. I should probably say this first. Do you guys know what the Fugitive Slave Act, the two big things was that were? So the Fugitive Slave Act allowed slave catchers to come to the north and take African Americans that they believed were escaped, take them to a judge where they would be determined whether or not they should go back. The judge was paid $10 if they were found guilty, $5 if they were found innocent. So they were literally incentivized to send them back to the South. The event was organized by Garrett Smith and Frederick Douglass. People were afraid of the impact it would have on the local community and on its business. The August Madison County Whig said, "Our citizens are in no manner committed to the selection of this village by people abroad of this as the scene of a convention of fugitive slaves and their sympathizers. Convenience of access and accommodations for such meetings, easily attainable here, have procured for us the distinction of several abolition meetings each season for a series of years now. Yet there are few abolitionists here, and the meeting occurred almost unnoticed, and with the exception of a few idle women and children, quite unattended, save by strangers from abroad. The first intimation that a convention was to be held here reached this place through the Eastern papers. The tender of our hospitalities is therefore unauthorized." And this is an era where every community, Cazenovia has 2 newspapers. They have If you guys remember the Post-Standard and the Herald Journal, you have a liberal rag and you have a conservative rag. One's going to have one opinion, one's going to have the other. But you also get the idea that they're telling you a starkly different attendance. They're saying just a few women and some random strangers showed up for the event, which by all accounts was 100% not true. If for nothing else, and we have a photo here that shows a pretty good number of people in attendance. Do that already. William Chaplin, who was the Center for the Anti-Slavery General Agent for the New York State Anti-Slavery Society, was scheduled to speak. He actually worked to help free some folks in Georgia, and he was going to bring them up to speak. He was arrested in Washington, D.C. John Brown spoke at this event and talked about the need to raise funds for his fight in Kansas. And Grace Wilson, who offered her orchard for the second day, was a widow and early settler of Cazenovia. She was active in the Cazenovia Anti-Slavery Society, a member of the Liberty Party, and operated a school for young women at her home and later nearby her home following the passing of her husband in 1815. So the importance of this photo is one that can't be understated. It was taken by Ezra Greenleaf Weld, who operated a daguerreotype studio in Cazenovia. This image is courtesy of the Madison County Historical Society, who is one of only two organizations that has an original. Ezra's brother Theodore was a prominent abolitionist from Massachusetts. Some folks think that this gentleman right here is Dwight Weld. Theodosia Gilbert was the fiancée of William Chaplin, who was sitting in Washington, D.C., as a reference, for trying to free a slave. That's this woman right here. George W. Clark of Rochester was a prominent abolitionist, music composer, and had published multiple books of abolitionist songs. Who's in there? Charles B. Ray, a minister, free African American, was forced to leave Wesleyan University because white students found his presence inexpedient. He eventually became a minister, a Methodist minister, and became the editor of the Colored American. Joseph Hathaway, a Quaker abolitionist from Waterloo, spoke on visiting Chaplin in prison with Gilbert. The Edmondson sisters, which is these two, let's see, Emily Edmondson's right there, and Mary Edmondson's right there, whose daring escape attempt at the ages of 13, 15, and 1848 from Washington, D.C. by boarding the schooner Pearl for a trip to Philadelphia along with 75 other slaves. Upon receiving word, some of the owners commandeered a steamboat that captured them about 200 miles away. They were paraded through the streets and up for auction 3 months later when they were purchased by Chaplin. Chaplin informed Garrett Smith that he had arranged for 50 slaves to escape by ship, but he was never formally implicated. So you had this big group of people who had experiences that talked about their experiences taking place in Cazenovia. And it made national news. You can find articles across the newspapers in the country about the event. And again, depending on what their lean was, will give you a different perspective on what happened that day.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
I think, interesting thing about that picture, I think Ann Smith is in it.
Where?
Ann Fitzhugh Smith. Go to the other one without the names on it.
Yep.
Right behind Hathaway's head.
Let's see, where's Hathaway hiding?
At the table.
Yeah.
At the table, so.
Seated in the front.
So here?
Right there.
Yeah.
I think that's Ann Fitzhugh Smith.
Wow.
If only we had the capability to unblur it a little more.
Yeah, it's just a speculation.
Yeah,
It
well,
looks like her.
yeah, and a lot of people say that this looks like Theodore Dwight Weld, but no one's been able to confirm it. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of people that have tried to figure out all the people in this list. But again, you have Frederick Douglass sitting right there too, Garrett Smith, and it would make sense that that was Ann if it's right there behind Garrett.
Frederick Douglass was definitely there?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's right there.
Thank you.
The 1850 fugitive slave meetings take place about a month and a half after in the village of Cazenovia. There was a meeting at the Free Church of Cazenovia to devise means for the speedy repeal of the fugitive slave law. You can actually see this up here in the newspaper, Freemen to the Rescue. The undersigned citizens of the town of Cazenovia earnestly respect all inhabitants, and it actually has a list of names. The sign stated that male or female, irrespective of party, to assembly for the purpose of expressing their sentiments to the fugitive slave law and devise for means of its speedy repeal. So it was an event that took place that was trying to get people organized. Again, the Free Church right here was where Kathleen Cummings Theater was. In this town, not too far from where we're standing right now, in 1852, the Liberty Party had its annual convention, which was held in Canastota. The meetings were held at the Dutch Reformed Church, which you can kind of see is right here. Here's Peterborough Street, canals over here, railroads. So it's somewhere kind of near, correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, Watson Wagner area.
Paris.
Yeah. The event featured representatives from a number of northern states, including Frederick Douglass, Jermaine Logan, Calvin Pepper, and Garrett Smith. During the second day, a debate broke out, which led to a group leaving, a group of people, and reconvening at the Free Church of Canastota down the street. Free Church was right over here somewhere. Liberty Party roots came from the breakup of the American Anti-Slavery Society. William Lloyd Garrison and his followers called for the creation of a new government. The other part of the party believed that those views were too radical and that the way to end slavery was to elect people who held their beliefs, create laws that outlawed slavery. The Liberty Party's origins go back to a meeting in Peterborough with Garrett Smith and 4 others. Calvin Pepper was a well-known abolitionist from Albany. The debate was over which report from the Pittsburgh Convention to approve, the majority, William Goodell's report, or the minority report, which was Garrett Smith's. The majority group is the one that moved down the road. In August of that year, a convention was held in Pittsburgh for free Democrats, free soilers, that was discussed. One approved revolution from that event was that no man instructed in the principles and imbued with the spirit of the Liberty Party can consent to vote for a candidate who either admits the possibility of legalizing slavery, who does not acknowledge the obligation of maintaining all political rights of all persons, black or white, male or female. So you see kind of the early roots for some other movements too with them. There is now a historic marker over by the village hall, town hall, correct, for this?
The marker for
the Liberty Party.
Yeah, no, it's not, they put it next to the Watson Wagon.
Oh, next to Watson Wagon. Okay.
But it should have been down to it further.
Yeah. 1856, Frederick Douglass speaks at the Madison County Fair. While the accounts vary, it was quite a substantial crowd, somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 people, depending on which account you read. He was quoted as saying, "Slavery has to be stopped, if not all at one time, then in pieces, but it must be stopped." Just to give you an idea, Madison County's population in 1850 was 43,000, which by that number, between 14 and 25% of the county's population attended the event. Now, obviously, there were probably people from Otsego County and Chenango County, but you just get the idea of what a huge draw this event was. He spoke in other places in Madison County. We know he spoke in Clockville a few days before. He spoke, obviously, in Casanova at a number of the free churches around the area. But this was likely the largest crowd he ever spoke to in Madison County. Again, there is a historic marker that was placed there, right on the grounds of the Madison County Fair, right as you pull in. The Independent Church of Canastota was established in 1845 when members of a different church had a different agreement over whether an abolitionist minister should be hired. The church had strong ties to the abolitionist movement, hosting the New York State Liberty Conventions, not the national one, in 1846, 1853, and 1854. Multiple members ran for political office, and the church hosted speakers such as Jermaine Logan, Frederick Douglass, Beriah Green, Samuel J. May. So if you're familiar with Canastota, it's this building, which is still there today. Now it has a very ugly storefront, I believe, still on it.
Yeah.
And it's apartments now, I think.
Yeah, people live there.
But that is what it looked like as a church. Now, the original church that would have hosted all of that burned in 1871 and was replaced. However, the church itself continued for a brief period. It's been on a bunch of different things. It was a music hall for a while. If you look at some of the Sanborn reports, it was a music hall. You can see here, this is 1859 map. You can see it says Free Church right there. The building still exists, as I said, still exists today. It's actually part of the historic district for that area as well. It's listed in there for I think it's the Center Street district. I don't think it's the Main Street or the Peterborough Street. I think it's the Center Street district. The Free Congregational Church, we already touched base on that with some of the other events. Originally splits from the Presbyterian Church, again, over the hiring of a minister in 1833. By the end of the decade, the Free Church membership grows greatly, has a membership largely in favor of abolition. The church had multiple speakers, including Frederick Douglass, Samuel Ringgold Ward. The church was no longer active by the Civil War. So again, if you're familiar with Casanova, this is the church. That's the Lincoln House right there. It's right behind the Lincoln House. It was destroyed by fire. I don't know if it was the fire of 1895 or it was destroyed before that. I think it was before that because it was replaced by the original theater, which was destroyed by fire in 1895. The Free Church of Peterborough was formed in 1847. It's also known as the Church of Peterborough. The original church formed in 1843. The church as in today, which is on the corner here, was built in 1847. All residents of the town were considered members, hosted prominent speakers such as Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, Solomon P. Chase, William Lloyd Garrison, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and more. Former enslaved individual Lewis Washington was a resident for 3 years and was a regular preacher on the pulpit. Another former slave, John West, led the church in singing. In April of 1859, John Brown was hosted by the church just about 6 months before the raid on Harper's Ferry. Today it is a private home, but it still exists. And this was one of the themes I probably should have talked about with the churches was you had these free churches pop out regularly from Congregational, but like the Presbyterian Church, the Quaker Church denounced slavery in like 1688. The Presbyterian Church denounced slavery in 1818. The Congregational Church was against slavery as well, but there was, again, factions within the church. The idea of immediate abolition versus like the Liberty Party using laws and legal ways to get people into office that would help abolish slavery. And so you had organizations split over specifically when somebody wanted to hire more of a fire and brimstone minister versus someone that was more typical with what was in the Congregational churches. So that's why you see these churches splitting. And most of the free churches had fairly short lives. This one actually lasted a little bit longer, because again, this is 1875, well after the Abolition, and it's still listed as a free church there. But some of the other ones, the Hamilton Free Church only existed for 6 or 7 years. The Casanova Church only existed for 25, 30 years. They were fairly short-lived and typically ended around the time of the abolition of slavery. Not always, but 1835, the DeRuyter Seventh-day Baptist Church was very active in abolition activities. The church passed numerous resolutions condemning slavery, as well as the fugitive slave law. Anti-slavery petitions were signed by members of the church, led by the Reverend Alexander Campbell, who served as an executive on the executive committee of the Madison County Anti-Slavery Society. So this is the church. It's still there today, although it's in incredibly poor condition. They're trying to, it's owned by the Town Historical Society. They're trying to find a buyer who will try and renovate it and turn it into some form of a community center. This is a map from like 1888, 1889, and it's actually there. This is where the town hall roughly is today. It's actually up here, but it was the old school that was torn down around 1910. But yeah, so you can see it. The development of the religious community led to the development of the village of the DeRuyter Institute, which is that building. Two newspapers were actually connected to the church between 1836 and 1845. The Protestant Sentinel and the Seventh-day Baptist Register were both anti-slavery publications. So that's kind of unique for such a small place. The church itself is actually on the National Register of Historic Places, so it's eligible for tax credits for whoever wants to try and buy it and save it. The Hamilton Free Church formed in 1846 when members of the Congregational Church, including the pastor, Abishai Schofield, who would be removed because of his political views, but would later serve in Lebanon, decided to leave. He had served in Peterborough as well. The church was staunchly anti-slavery and pro-temperance. Again, those were two opinions that commonly went together. At the church, the Liberty Association of Hamilton and Anti-Slavery Society was formed. This was the one I referenced. It only existed for about 7 years. The building was go on to serve as the village office. Today it still exists. It's a private home. During the Civil War, it actually served as a hospital for the 157th and was a meeting place for St. Mary's Church while their church was being built. So we have these different places. This is an image of it today. Today, if you drive down Madison Street, it's a huge yellow house. Again, see the marking right there. The church that it broke away from was actually where roughly the post office is today. The next one is one of the more unique things, and I don't have a lot of answers to, but I came across it kind of by accident. In August of 1934, a steam shovel digging road work unearthed a tunnel located on the property of Reverend Frederick Allen just east of West Eaton on Route 26. The tunnel was 45 feet long, and there was a round 6-foot room in the side of the hill. It is believed this may, I have no idea what I wrote there, may have gone to the house on the property. So they believe the tunnel may have at some point in time connected to the house on the property. I know this is really hard to believe or see, but that is actually somebody standing outside the tunnel before they went in. There's another image of people coming out of the tunnel. In the first 10 days afterwards, they estimated that 6,000 people came to see the tunnel. The tunnel was 6 feet below the earth. The walls were made of stone, which is hard to see, but you can kind of see there. The property had been in the same family, Reverend Allen's wife's family, for over 100 years, yet she had no knowledge and had ever heard of the tunnel. So within the tunnel were animal bones that had been cooked and prepared. Earthenware consistent with the mid-19th century was found, as well as poorly constructed shoes. Initially, some guesses were thought to be, it could have been something for Native Americans, counterfeiters, home for an illicit still during Prohibition. Most of these ideas were pretty quickly thrown aside, and the most logical idea that came out of it was that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Something incredibly hard to prove, and the person that was living in the house at the time was a shoe cobbler and didn't have any known abolitionist ties. So you'll hear stories of tunnels a lot. A lot of times homeowners will call me and the first thing you say to them is, think about the logic of trying to build a tunnel from your house to the barn. That's crazy. It would take too much engineering prowess. It would take too long. And then lo and behold, we have a tunnel in Madison County. They actually drew out what it looked like. It's uncommon for tunnels to be dug for the escape of enslaved individuals. It's much more likely you would be hiding in an attic, a cellar, a barn, something like that where you could hide it and you could do it quickly. Colgate University geology professor Harold Whitenall proposed that it seemed likely to be hiding area for escaped slaves on their path to freedom, but didn't know that for sure. It wasn't believed to have been a well. The oil was found not to be a traditional, at the bottom of a typically dug out well, so the base they didn't believe was a well. It was believed based on the volume of leather. There may have been a cobbler shop. We know that because the person living there in the census was listed as a cobbler. And it appears the tunnel was filled in. The current owners, when they were contacted by the Freedom Trail Commission in 2005, had no knowledge of this ever happening. And unfortunately, they had a fire earlier this year, so I did not reach out to them again when we did this. I did speak to Colgate. They have certain collections of Harold Whitenall. They're going to try and go through and see if he mentions everything. The only reference I can find after the initial newspaper clippings, these, is in October of that year, he spoke at the Madison County Historical Society's annual meeting and talked about it, but they didn't say what he actually talked about. So hopefully Colgate may be able to find some more of his papers in there, and we might get some more. But it's just kind of a neat story that ties into it, where we may never have a true ending, true idea of what it was. So we'll talk about some people now that played an important role in the abolitionist movement in the county. Francis Hall is born in 1802 in Farmington, Connecticut. He moves to the south and worked in business before entering the Baptist ministry. Lives in North Carolina. Marries his wife, Mary McLeod, in 1829. They had 3 children before returning to Connecticut. He moved with his family to Casanova in the early 1840s. He operates a shoe store before becoming the minister in the Free Churches in Smithfield and Casanova. He served as the vice president of the Fugitive Slave Law Convention. So that's his house right there, along Route 20. In Connecticut, he served as the pastor of the Baptist Church of Colebrook, lived in North and South Carolina. He wrote about what he saw in North and South Carolina in Theodore Wells' book, American Slavery as It Is, in 1839. He was very, very blunt. He was quite awful. But he wrote about that. That's kind of where I found out about him. He was also very active in the temperance movement. Of course, we can't talk about abolition in Madison County without talking about Gerrit Smith. Gerrit Smith grew up in a slave-owning family. The slaves were sold after their home was built in Peterborough. This greatly impacted his outlook on the institution of slavery. Smith was initially a supporter of the American Colonization Society, but after the first New York State Anti-Slavery Society meeting, he became an abolitionist. In 1834, he opened the Manual Labor School for African American students. He used his philanthropy to help many individuals, institutions over the course of his life. was born in Utica. His father, Peter, had a massive land business, which was where their wealth came from. Garrett continued handling that business. He graduated from Hamilton College in 1818, was an active temperance campaigner. He built one of the first temperance hotels in the country in Peterborough. He helped support John Brown on his raid to Harper's Ferry and helped organize the Liberty Party in 1840. We've kind of gone through a lot of this. Ran for governor of New York in 1840 and 1858 on an anti-slavery society, and served briefly in the National House of Representatives in 1848. After John Brown was caught, he was so upset, he had a breakdown, was forced to spend time in the Utica Asylum, was a very strong supporter of women's rights, as well as his cousin Elizabeth Cady Stanton. He died in New York City in 1874, and he's buried in Peterborough Cemetery. This was the home which burned in a fire in the 1930s.
March 2nd, 1936.
There you go. You have literally the author of the biography there behind us. One of the more interesting things, if you follow the county, we do these little videos every now and again about different things, and we did a video in Peterborough about some of the events, and Norm was nice enough to take us. There is a barn in the back, and one of the places in the back was the horse stalls where people would hide, and the person who goes with me in films just broke down crying as Norm told the story of what it would be like for somebody to hide at that moment in time in this place while they were making their way to freedom.
The barn is pictured there on the left.
Yes. So you don't open it normally for tours, but there are certain times where it's open where people can look and see, because it's not incredibly stable, if my memory serves me right, correct? So, but it's a wonderful place to go up, and it's one of those places you can kind of feel the history in your bones when you do it. Federal Dana was a clerk for Garrett Smith, was an abolitionist in his own right. He was a delegate to the National Anti-Slavery Nominating Committee Convention in 1840. He also served on the Kansas County Committee and signed the Fronter anti-slavery petition in 1838. He was also the individual that took Harriet Powell from Peterborough to Cape Vincent, where she crossed into Canada. His nephew, Asa Mahan, was the first president of Oberlin College, which became the hub of abolitionist activity. He's buried in Western New York. I referenced that there was a letter from him to Garrett Smith. It reads simply, "I have just received your line by Mr. Dana and commit to his, in your care, all wise providence, the precious charge that has been for a few short days sheltered beneath my humble roof from the foul catcher of our detestable South. Oh, may the God of the oppressed speed this interesting refugee from our southern prison house to a land where slavery is not known. I shall be happy to attend the convention in Casanova if I can, consistently, but I do not know if I can. If I do not, let me know all I could wish." So he touches base there and talks about Harriet Powell being free. That's that letter there. James Caleb Jackson, who was the first editor of the Madison County Abolitionist, lived in Peterborough from 1838 to 1847. He was the secretary of the American Anti-Slavery Society for 2 years. In 1846, he toured New York with Lewis Washington, who we talked a little bit about. He was born in 1811. He was also the editor of the Liberty Press and the Albany Patriot. He was a doctor who moved to Dansville in 1858 and opened the Dansville Sanitarium. He was a pioneer in the health reform movement and created something called granola. Does anybody know what granola is? Granola was granola, but somebody named Kellogg took granola and changed the name to granola. Granola, the first manufactured cereal in 1863, was similar to grape nuts. The cereal had to be soaked overnight to be eaten. The idea was stolen by a person named Dr. John Kellogg. After being threatened with a lawsuit, Kellogg changed the name to granola. Kellogg's brother founded a cereal company, invented a cereal named cornflakes. Myrtilla Minor is one of my favorite stories. Was born in Brookfield in 1815, despite coming from humble beginnings. She was able to receive enough education to become a teacher. In 1846, she accepts a teaching position in Whitesville, Mississippi. She asked for permission to teach African American girls to read. She was denied. Frustrated, she moved to Washington, D.C., and in 1851, 10 years before the start of the Civil War, she formed the Normal School for Colored Girls. The school was able to survive with the help of donors such as Harry Beecher Stowe, Johns Hopkins. Board members included Johns Hopkins. She was a very sickly child and continued to be sick most of her life. However, she fought to keep the school running. She dies in 1861 at a very young age due to illness. 1864. Her school would go on to become what is today the University of the District of Columbia. And in fact, if you go, there is a Myrtilla Minor Elementary School as well in Washington, D.C. Samuel Thomas was a harness maker who took over his father's business. For the Fugitive Slave Law Convention, he served as a temporary secretary. In 1851, he took part in the Jerry Rescue in Syracuse, helping free a captured slave from the custody of the U.S. Marshal and helping him escape to Canada. Garrett Smith actually spoke at his funeral. The Jerry Rescue, if you've ever gone into Armory Square, there's a monument to the Jerry Rescue that's there. He changed from the Methodist faith to the Free Church and was sent to talk to Theodosia Gilbert upon the arrest of her husband, William Chaplin. We talked a little bit about that. Mary Springstead is an interesting story. So it's somewhat hard to kind of find abolitionists because they weren't always very open about their views. Mary Springstead moved to Casanova with her husband in the late 1830s. In the 1840s, she is listed being on the roll call of the American Anti-Slavery Society. She signed multiple anti-slavery petitions and served on the business committee of the Casanova Convention in 1852. She was also a very early active woman suffragist. She lived on what today would be 9 Nickerson Street in Casanova. The problem is there was a Mary Springstead of New York who was elected as a manager of the 18th annual meeting of the American Anti-Slavery Society in Rochester. This person is listed as a Quaker. So we're not 100% sure if there was 2 Mary Springsteads or if she was a Quaker. There was a Quaker settlement in DeRuyter, so we did have Quakers here, but living in the village, we're just not sure. There might have been 2. Springstead also spoke at an 1852 Women's Rights Convention in Syracuse with Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and her husband was also an active abolitionist. The Reverend Abram Pine served as an associate editor of the North Star, Frederick Douglass's newspaper, while he was in England for 19 months. He lived in the village of Casanova, served as the minister of the Congregational Church. In September of 1858, the Reverend Abram Pine took the challenge of William G. Brownlow to have a scriptural debate of slavery. So they were going to use the Bible in debate slavery. Initially, Frederick Douglass took up the challenge, but Brownlow would not debate him because of his race. After the time, Pine was the minister of the McGrawville Church. So you can kind of see here, we observe that Reverend A. Pine, who was formerly the progressive church in this village, established a paper in McGrawville in connection, and then this is a thing for his paper in Casanova. He served as an assemblyman in Wayne County area, lived in Peterborough in 1854. While there, he published The Christian and Citizen, and unfortunately, he committed suicide in 1862. Just down the road from us here, Scipio Moorhan was an enslaved individual who was freed with the assistance of the Jarvis family, specifically Miss Faye Jarvis, who he rode back with while posing as her servant from Missouri. Upon his arrival, he worked as a farmer and laborer. According to his obituary, he purchased a home following the death of his wife in 1879. He lived in that home until his death in 1887. He is buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery. So the reason we put this up here is he had ties to Dr. Jarvis, and we believe his home was somewhere in here. However, we have never found a deed to confirm that. However, again, the obituary states that he purchased a home. So our best guess, and the home was on Canal Street, our best guess is it was probably tied to Dr. Jarvis. And if you came to our cemetery tour last year, he was a featured character. The great Max Smith portrayed him, and Max has taken on himself personally to learn more about Scipio and try and get a broader story. So prior to 2006, the Madison County Bicentennial Freedom Trail, Madison County created 4 trails: architecture, freedom, history, and hops. The Freedom Trail Commission compiled 6 archival boxes, they're each 1 cubic foot, with records on the abolitionist movement, events, peoples, and places. The commission continues to research when requested. I think it was the summer of 2021. We actually moved all those boxes formally to my office because technically it was a county commission and that's where it should have ended up. So if you want to see those or if you have questions about your properties, we can go through those files and see what we have. Obviously, it's only Madison County, but there is stuff from every single town. You can kind of see up here, here's some of the files, Casanova Abolitionist, Fugitive Slave Law. There's a Casanova College file. There's also the Freedom Trail map, which each town has a story that they told in it, which is a really neat thing. You can find that online pretty easily. And with that, I will ask if there's any questions, comments, or rude remarks. How long did I go?
45 minutes.
There you go, that's the perfect time. Nobody fell asleep.
No.
Yes, ma'am.
We're from Whitelaw, and the Whitelaw Church was established in 1826, and it broke off from the Oneida Lake Church over a debate on something. The vote was 14-12, and the 12 people created Whitelaw. The notes, we have the records and stuff like that, they just say it just started. Actually, I think it was Ridgeville beforehand. Would they have to file anything to create a church
Yeah, so-
with the county?
Yes,
With
so-
the records?
Madison County has the original Book of Incorporations. The original Book of Incorporations is typically churches and actually occasionally libraries. But they were really, you're talking libraries in like the 1820s, so a little different than today. So yes, in theory, we would have the incorporation. It's probably not going to tell you anything beyond where they were meeting, who were the original trustees and officers, and what the faith was. So it's not going to tell you why they split from, that's going to be something that probably exists in, do you have all the meeting minutes from the event?
The meeting notes they have, it has exactly what you say was 5.
Yeah.
Just the trustees who established.
Yeah, so that's what,
it.
so our stuff is literally the incorporation, so it's what they had to have by law. I've never seen anything beyond that. So it's good in the sense of, a lot of times churches don't know how they bought their building, and a lot of times it's tied to the trustees, not necessarily the church, so it's good in that regard. But in the sense of getting any information about why it was founded, it's probably not going to be there. But you're welcome to look and see. It's something we have that we can pull very quickly.
Would there have been, like anti-slave movement to go across like Oneida Lake when it's frozen, or?
So there wouldn't really have been a reason to go across Oneida Lake because you're still in New York.
Yeah, okay.
Lake Ontario, Garrett Smith owned a good portion of the Port of Ontario. That was why that connection was so profound and easy to utilize, because he could have someone hop in a carriage and go. And if my memory serves me right, correct me if I'm wrong here, Norm, his wife would always ride in her carriage with the doors closed so that it didn't look weird if the doors were closed. Even on a hot day, she might be inclined to keep the doors closed. That way nobody said, hey, that's weird, why is her doors closed today? So that regardless of what happened, it always seemed normal. So he was able to utilize his wealth and his people and connections to get people to Oswego, and then typically they would take a ship. I can't imagine they would ever walk across Lake Ontario.
No.
Take a ship across to Canada. St. Catharines was a specific spot that a lot of people went. Yes, ma'am.
Were the 4,000 people that came to Peterborough all men?
400, that was the
that was the typo.
that I typed.
Okay.
I knew that and I forgot to fix
Okay.
it. Yes, as far as we can tell, they were all men. There were very active female abolitionists early on, but for that meeting, we don't know of any women, correct? There were a small number of African Americans, but not a lot.
A lot of women in the village helped.
When they came up to here, they kind of put the village to work, cooking, cleaning, prepping. I don't have the notes with me right now, but James Caleb Jackson had a number of positive things to say. And one of the more interesting things, Norm's written a book with this title, but one of the more interesting that comes out of the abolitionist movement is Henry Highland Garnett, who was an African American abolitionist, said there was only 2 places a slave catcher was unwelcome, heaven and Peterborough. And I think that's a great line to kind of sum up the views of Central New York and our role, specifically Madison County, in that movement. Any other questions? Thank you for coming.